मंच एक खुला मंच है, आए जब भी चाहे। किशोर मंच एक खुला मंच है, आए जब भी चाहे। हर किशोर को मिलेगा अवसर, खुलती जाए राहें। आए जब भी चाहे, आए जब भी चाहे, आए जब भी चाहे, आए जब भी चाहे। हो कला सामाजिक ज्ञान, भाषा गणित या हो विज्ञान, कठिन नहीं है विषय कोई भी, करो जरा सा ध्यान। हो कला सामाजिक ज्ञान, भाषा गणित या हो विज्ञान, कठिन नहीं है विषय कोई भी, करो जरा सा ध्यान।
ये है
किशोर मंच।
Dear students, in the previous class we have studied about the different types of conductors, that is the metallic conductor, also known as the electronic conductor and electrolytic conductor. We also studied about the resistance which is offered by the conductor to the flow of the current. The reciprocal of resistance is conductance, and then we studied about resistivity and conductivity. Now, the next topic of this unit is molar conductance. If we take 1 mole of the electrolyte, then the ions produced by this 1 mole of electrolyte offers conductance. This conductance is molar conductance. Let me define it. It is defined as the conductance of the volume V of the solution containing 1 mole of the electrolyte kept between 2 electrodes with area of cross section A and distance of unit length L. The symbol for the molar conductivity is lambda with subscript small m. Mathematically, lambda m or the molar conductance is related to kappa, that is conductivity, by as per equation 1. Lambda m is equals to kappa upon C, where C is the concentration, which is expressed in moles per liter. Lambda m is also equals to the product of conductivity and volume. K kappa is conductivity and capital V is volume. The unit of the molar conductance. By substituting the units of the kappa and volume or concentration, we get the unit of the lambda m as Siemens meter square per mole. Variation of conductivity and molar conductivity with concentration. Let me again revise you what is conductivity. We have already studied in the previous class. Conductivity or specific conductance is the conductance of 1 centimeter cube of the solution. It depends upon the ions which are present in 1 centimeter cube of the solution. And the molar conductivity is the conductance of the ions produced by 1 mole of the electrolyte. So, there is a difference between conductivity and molar conductivity. Let us study how the concentration or dilution affects both of them, kappa and lambda m. First of all, effect of concentration on conductivity. As we know that it depends upon the number of ions in 1 centimeter cube of the solution. So, when the solution is concentrated, the number of ions is more. But as soon as we dilute the solution by adding some more solvent, the number of ions in 1 centimeter cube of the solution decreases. And since the number of ions decreases, the conductivity also decreases. The behavior is same for strong and weak electrolytes both. Effect of concentration on molar conductivity. In this case, the behavior will be different for the strong and the weak electrolyte. I have explained you, strong electrolyte is the electrolyte which dissociates almost completely, and the weak electrolytes never dissociate completely. So, the behavior is different for strong and weak electrolyte with dilution, or you can say concentration. We will discuss it one by one. We know that just now I have told you lambda m is equals to kappa into volume, that is conductivity into volume. Now, we are diluting the solution, that means we are increasing the volume. When the volume increases, lambda m increases. Now, for the strong electrolyte, let me explain you what happens exactly. In the strong electrolyte, we know that it is dissociated completely. So, on dilution, there is not much appreciable increase in the number of ions, but the mobility of ions increases when we dilute the solution. And when the mobility of the ions increases, the lambda m automatically increases. With the help of the graph, you will be able to understand the behavior of a strong and the weak electrolyte. In the case of the strong electrolyte, also what happens is, when the solution is concentrated, there is strong interionic attractions because ions, they do not have volume to move, they do not have space to move, and since they are oppositely charged, they attract each other and their mobility decreases. As soon as we increase the volume, the interationic forces decreases and they are now free to move and they contribute to the molar conductance. In the case of the weak electrolytes, as I have told you, they are not completely dissociated. On dilution, the dissociation increases. Dissociation increases, that means the number of the ions also increases. When the number of ions increases, they will automatically contribute towards the molar conductance and hence the molar conductance increases. Now, let me explain you the Debye-Huckel-Onsager equation. The Debye-Huckel-Onsager equation correlates molar conductance at any concentration with the molar conductance at infinite dilution. Let me tell you what is molar conductance at infinite dilution, which is also known as limiting molar conductivity. What happens in the case of the strong electrolyte? When we dilute the solution, there is a slow increase in the molar conductance and soon it approaches the maximum limiting value of the molar conductance. And after some dilution, it approaches the limiting value, and after which on further dilution, there is no further increase in the molar conductance. This is lambda m naught. Lambda m and lambda m naught are related by Debye-Huckel-Onsager equation. Lambda m is equals to lambda m naught minus a root c, where a is a constant. From this relation, you can very well see that as the concentration approaches 0, that is infinite dilution, lambda m becomes equals to lambda m naught. Let me explain you the molar conductance for strong and weak electrolyte with dilution. In the graph, you can see that there is a blue line for strong electrolyte, and you can see that as we are decreasing the concentration and increasing the dilution, the blue line soon approaches and touches the y-axis and we get limiting value of molar conductivity. This is the behavior for strong electrolyte. The examples of the strong electrolytes are like potassium chloride, sodium chloride, hydrogen chloride, etc. For the weak electrolyte, there is a red line or a red curve you can see. For the weak electrolyte, there is a slow but continuous increase in the value of the molar conductance when the concentration approaches 0. But from the graph you can very well see that the red line becomes parallel to y-axis and it is never touching it. That is, even by the extrapolation of the curve, that is the red curve, we will not get limiting value of the molar conductance for weak electrolyte, because the weak electrolytes are never completely dissociated. So, I can say that the lambda m value for the weak electrolytes can never be calculated experimentally. Then what is the method by which we can calculate, we can find out the lambda m value for the weak electrolytes? That is the Kohlrash's law. Let me explain you what is Kohlrash's law. Kohlrash's law of independent migration of ions. The scientist Kohlrash, he observed that the ions, they have a definite and independent contribution towards molar conductance. He observed the dissociation and contribution of different ions in different electrolytes, taking strong and weak electrolytes, and then he gave his law, that is Kohlrash's law of independent migration of ions. The law states that limiting molar conductivity of an electrolyte can be represented as the sum of the individual contributions of the anion and cation of the electrolyte. For example, lambda m infinity for sodium chloride can be calculated by simply adding the contribution of the sodium ions and the chloride ions. Kohlrash's law is very useful in calculating the theoretical lambda m value for the weak electrolytes, which otherwise cannot be found out experimentally. We can just take the values of the contribution of the different ions by taking them from the suitable strong electrolytes, and simply by adding those values we can find out lambda m value for the weak electrolytes. Using Kohlrash's law, we can also find out the degree of dissociation, that is alpha, is mathematically equals to lambda m upon lambda m infinity. We can also find out the dissociation constant, that is K. K is equals to C alpha square upon 1 minus alpha, whereas alpha is the degree of dissociation. Let me take a suitable example of a weak electrolyte. Acetic acid is a weak electrolyte. It will not dissociate completely. So, to calculate its molar conductance experimentally is impossible. But by using the Kohlrash's law, I can find out its limiting molar conductance by just simply adding the contribution of the acetate ions and the hydrogen ion. But these values are taken from a strong electrolyte. Let's take an example. To find out the lambda m infinity or the limiting molar conductivity of acetic acid, I have to take the values from 3 strong electrolytes. These are sodium acetate, which has the contribution of acetate and sodium ions, hydrogen chloride, which is the contribution of the hydrogen and the chloride ions, and lambda m infinity for NaCl, which is the contribution of sodium ions and chloride ions. Simply by adding and subtracting the suitable values, we can find out theoretical value of lambda m infinity of acetic acid. So dear students, just now I have explained you the effect of dilution or concentration on conductivity and molar conductance, and I have also explained you the Kohlrash's law and its application. Dear students, we are doing electrochemistry, and around us many electrochemical phenomena are taking place. So we will discuss these examples, what are taking place around us which are actually electrochemical in nature. Corrosion is one of such phenomena. In your daily life, you have seen the iron articles, they get rust, or the silver articles, they get tarnish. When the silver ornaments are new, they shine, but after some use, they become dull. In the same way, the old statues or the medals or the copper utensils, they develop a green coating. What is this? Actually, this is corrosion. That means these metallic objects, they react with the gases present in the air or the atmosphere and develop some coating on them. Usually this coating is an oxide layer, but it may be of any salt. Why we are taking corrosion here? Because it is an electrochemical phenomena. And the term, let me tell you, the term rust is only used for the iron articles. Dear children, we also know that these bridges or these machineries are all made up of iron, and the rusting of iron causes enormous damage. Let me explain you what is corrosion and define it. Actually, it is defined as the wasting away of the metal. When the metal reacts with the atmospheric gases, the oxide layer or the salts are formed on the metal surface. This is corrosion. Rusting is corrosion, but every corrosion is not rusting. It is an electrochemical phenomena. Let me explain you the mechanism of rusting. Any article that is made up of iron, when it comes in contact with air and moisture, it starts developing a brown coating on it. This brown coating is the rust. Chemically, it is hydrated ferric oxide. Now, any point on the iron which first comes in the contact with the air and the moisture, it starts acting as anode. Anode means loss of electron will take place at that point, that is oxidation. So, the iron on that point loses electron and it is oxidized to ferrous state. These electrons, they move through this article and it reduces the oxygen on the other point in the presence of the hydrogen ions. Now, from where these hydrogen ions come? Actually, the atmospheric carbon dioxide in the presence of the moisture forms carbonic acid, that is H2CO3. This carbonic acid provides hydrogen ion. The oxygen in the presence of the hydrogen ions accepts electron and get reduced and form water. It all takes place at cathode. I have already explained you oxidation takes place at anode and reduction takes place at cathode. And oxidation is the loss of electron and reduction is the gain of electron. In this way, the iron is oxidized to the ferrous state, which is further oxidized to the ferric state. Then the iron in the ferric state reacts with the water and is oxidized to form ferric oxide. Chemically, the rust is Fe2O3.XH2O. Since we know that the rusting causes enormous damage, it may be the reason behind an accident when a bridge falls. So, we have to prevent the rusting. The very easy and the convenient method is to cut off the iron article from the contact of air and water. For this, we apply the paint or the oil coating. We can also use the chemical known as bisphenol. We can also take the use of some more reactive metal. Either we can coat the iron article with that metal. For example, coating of the iron article with the zinc is known as galvanization. So, in the place of the iron, that reactive metal loses electron and get oxidized, and the iron article is saved. This is also known as sacrificial protection. We can also use some another metal like tin. Now let me tell you what are the conditions that increases the rusting. If the medium is acidic, it increases rusting. If the water is saline, then also it increases rusting, because the saline water has many ions. Even the carbonic acid, also the increase in the concentration of the CO2 increases the rusting, because CO2 dissolves in the water and form carbonic acid, which in turn provides hydrogen ion. But the alkaline medium reduces rusting, because alkaline medium produces OH ions that neutralize the protons or the hydrogen ions which are required for rusting. So now I hope it's very much clear that why the corrosion is included in the lesson electrochemistry, because actually it is an electrochemical phenomena and there is a development of anode and cathode on the iron article or any other metal surface. The next application of the electrochemical phenomena is the cells and the batteries. The cells and the batteries we are using in day-to-day life. We use a dry cell in the transistor or in the torch, or we use a small mercury cell in our wristwatches or the hearing aids. The battery is the combination of two or more galvanic cells in the series. Now we will study about some commercial cells, but these commercial cells are classified as the primary cells and the secondary cells. There is one more category of the cell which is known as a fuel cell, that we will study later. First of all, the primary cells or the primary batteries and the secondary cell and the secondary batteries. First of all, what is this primary cell? Primary cells or the primary batteries are those batteries which once used up, they are wasted and we have to throw them away. They cannot be recharged. But the secondary batteries are rechargeable. Just by applying the electric current, external electric current, they can be recharged and we can use them again and again. As you know that the battery used in the inverter is used up in our day-to-day life can be recharged. But the cells which we use in our remote or the watches, once used up, we have to throw them. Now let us take the two examples of the primary cells and example of the secondary cells. I will discuss their construction and working. Dry cell. It is a primary battery or a primary cell. In the dry cell, there is a zinc container that acts as a node. The cathode is made up of a graphite rod surrounded by manganese dioxide. The electrolyte is the paste of ammonium chloride and manganese dioxide. The zinc acts as anode. That means it will lose electrons and it gets oxidized to Zn2+ state. These two electrons are accepted at cathode. Manganese is reduced from +4 state to +3 state by accepting the electron, and ammonia gas is formed. This ammonia is not released as gas, but it combines with the zinc ions and forms a complex. The reactions at anode and cathode and the transfer of the electron from the anode to cathode is responsible for the production of the electricity. Now, since it is a primary cell, it cannot be recharged, and once the chemicals are used up, we have to throw it away. The zinc metal develops pores after some time, since the zinc container develops hole. So, to prevent the leakage, the zinc container is surrounded by some steel or iron coating. Initially, the coating was of a hardboard. Just now I have explained you the construction and the working of the dry cell, which we are using in our daily life. Dear students, just I have explained you the primary batteries and the secondary batteries, and why we have to throw away the primary cells and not the secondary cells. And then I have explained you the construction and the working of the dry cell. The dry cell has anode and cathode, and there is an actual transfer of electrons from the anode to the cathode, which is responsible for the production of electricity. And this dry cell cannot be recharged, and once used up, it is wasted. Dear students, in the previous class, I have explained you the primary and the secondary batteries. The primary batteries are those which cannot be used up again because they cannot be recharged, and the chemicals, when are over or used up, we have to throw it away. The secondary batteries are those batteries which can be recharged and can be used again and again. I also explained you the construction and the working of the dry cell. Today I am taking another example of a primary cell known as mercury cell. It is also commonly known as a button cell. It is used in those devices which need low current. For example, hearing aids, wristwatches or the calculators. Let me explain you the construction of a mercury cell. Since it is an electrochemical cell, so there must be an anode, a cathode and an electrolyte, and obviously there will be the transfer of electrons. The anode here is made up of zinc. The cathode is made up of mercuric oxide and graphite, and the electrolyte is zinc oxide and KOH. The reactions at anode. At anode, we already know that the oxidation takes place. Oxidation means the loss of electrons. Since the anode is made up of zinc, zinc will lose 2 electrons and will oxidize to Zn2 plus state. These 2 electrons are accepted at cathode, and HgO, that is mercuric oxide, is reduced to mercury. Just see the overall reaction. Zn, within the brackets it's Hg, this is known as zinc amalgam, plus HgO solid, and it gives zinc oxide plus Hg. With Hg in the brackets it's written L, small l, that denotes that it is liquid. I hope you all know that mercury is only the liquid metal. In the overall reaction, you see that there is no involvement of any ion whose concentration can change. So, the cell potential of the mercury cell or the button cell is constant. It is a very common question which is normally asked in the exams, that why the cell potential of the button cell remains constant, and its answer is its overall reaction does not involve any ion whose concentration changes. Secondary cells. The example is a lead storage battery. This is the battery we are using in the inverters. It has an anode and cathode. Anode is lead plates and the cathode is a lead grid packed with lead oxide, and the electrolyte is the 38% solution of sulfuric acid. Let me explain you its working. At anode, which is made up of lead, it gets oxidized by losing 2 electrons and it forms Pb2+. Pb2+ combines with the sulfate ions and forms lead sulfate. On the cathode, the 2 electrons which are lost by the anode are gained at cathode. PbO2 is reduced to Pb2+ form and then it forms lead sulfate. So, lead sulfate gets deposited in the inverter batteries or the lead storage batteries. Slowly, the sulfuric acid is also consumed. Its density decreases. Lead storage battery is a secondary cell, so it can be recharged by just passing electric current. On passing the electric current, the reactions are reversed. The flow of the electrons is also reversed, and the role of anode and cathode is also reversed. The lead sulfate which was deposited during discharging, now it forms lead and lead oxide, and the chemicals are again refreshed. So, this cycle is repeated again and again. When there is no light or when we are using the battery, the chemicals are used up and that is known as the discharging. But when we are not using it, all the chemicals are recharged. So, we can use the lead storage battery again and again. There is another example of the secondary cell, that is nickel cadmium cell. The nickel cadmium cell is very eco-friendly and very light and compact, but it is expensive. So, normally we don't use it. But if we have to prefer out of this lead storage or nickel cadmium, no doubt nickel cadmium cell is expensive, but since it is eco-friendly, so we must prefer the nickel cadmium cell, keeping in mind the long-term benefits. We must take care of our environment. The next topic is the fuel cell. Again, it is an electrochemical cell. Dear children, in the thermal plants, we know that how the electricity is generated. I hope you know that the fossil fuels are burnt and this energy is used to convert water into high pressure steam. This steam is used to run the turbines and the electricity is produced. The efficiency is very less and it causes pollution. So, nowadays fuel cells are used. In this, we oxidize or we burn some fuel. For example, hydrogen, methanol or methane can be used as fuel, and the oxidizing agent can be used like oxygen we normally use. Today, I will explain you the working and the construction of hydrogen oxygen fuel cell. This cell was used in Apollo space program. First of all, let us define what is a fuel cell. Cells which convert chemical energy obtained from combustion of fuel directly into electrical energy are known as fuel cells. They are quite efficient and free from pollution. Today's example is a hydrogen oxygen fuel cell. Here, hydrogen is the fuel. From the diagram, you can see that from one side the hydrogen is bubbled constantly and from the other side the oxygen gas is bubbled. The electrodes are made up of porous carbon and the electrolyte is sodium hydroxide. The construction you can see. This is another diagram of the fuel cell which is showing the working and the combination of the hydrogen and oxygen. The byproduct is water. The water vapors are condensed and these vapors, when condensed, the liquid water is used by the astronauts. So, we can say that a fuel cell is very eco-friendly. There is no pollutants are produced. In the hydrogen oxygen fuel cell, a catalyst is also used which is normally either platinum or palladium. I hope you all know that the role of the catalyst. It increases the rate of reaction. Details we will study in the next unit, that is chemical kinetics. Now let me explain the reactions which are taking place at anode and cathode. At anode, hydrogen gas reacts with the hydroxide ions. It loses 4 electrons and the water is formed. These electrons which are lost at anode, they are gained at cathode by oxygen, and these electrons which are lost at the anode are gained at cathode, and oxygen in presence of the water accepts these 4 electrons and hydroxide ions are formed. Overall reaction: 2H2 plus O2 gives water molecule. So you can see that there is no product is formed which causes pollution. Only the water is formed, and when the fuel cell, this hydrogen oxygen fuel cell, was used in the Apollo space program, the water was used for the drinking purposes by the astronauts. So dear students, in this unit we studied about the electrochemical phenomena. The electrochemical phenomena in which the electrical energy is produced by the energy which is produced during a spontaneous chemical reaction and is converted into electrical energy. This electric energy is in turn used to carry out non-spontaneous chemical reactions. I also explained you the working of a galvanic cell, the need of a Saul bridge for the continuous working of a galvanic cell, also known as the Daniell cell. Then I explained you how to calculate the cell potential, the standard electrode potential by using the Nernst equation. We also studied about the conductors, the metallic conductors and the electrolytic conductors, that how the metallic conductors are different from the electrolytic conductors. I also explained you the concepts like resistance, conductance, resistivity, conductivity and the molar conductance. Then I explained that how the concentration or the dilution affects the conductivity and molar conductance, and I also explained through the graph. This graph is very important for the examination purpose. You must know how to plot the graph and how to explain the variation of the molar conductance with dilution. Then comes the Kulrash's law. It's very useful law to calculate the limiting molar conductivity of the weak electrolyte which otherwise cannot be found out experimentally. Then we also studied the electrochemical processes taking place in our day-to-day life, where we must know that we are using cells and batteries and fuel cell which are based on the electrochemical phenomena. We also studied the hydrogen oxygen fuel cell. I hope all the topics are clear to you.
Hello students, I am Dr. Aruna Mohan from Delhi University discussing with you reproductive system. We have understood the fact that this system is important for continuation of species, and that is how evolution has taken place, and we know that we are at the top of evolution. We have discussed male reproductive system, and now we are going to discuss in this session the female reproductive system. Every woman has a pair of ovaries, that means 2 ovaries, and they are placed inside the abdomen, or ovaries are abdominal. Ovaries are filled with ovarian follicles. Near ovary we can see finger-like projections which are fimbriated part, and after this will start the oviduct. The ova will come out from ovary and will be taken up by this fimbriated end of the oviduct. Then there are two oviducts which go down towards the uterus in the abdominal cavity and end on pear shaped uterus. In human beings we have one uterus, whereas in case of rats we have two, or we can say bicornuate uterine horns. But the human female has one uterus and both the oviducts will end on this. The uterus, which is pear shaped or broad at the top and narrow towards the end, continues down and finally ends on cervix. The cervical canal will end on vagina or will continue through vagina, and vagina will open to the exterior by vaginal aperture, which is very close to urinary aperture. So, in case of female or in case of woman, in the lower abdominal part we have three structures lying almost together. One is rectum, other is uterus, and third is urinary bladder. In this slide you can see tiers of ovary, and as I have already told you, ovary is filled with many follicles. We call them ovarian follicles. Now, these ovarian follicles, they will be at various stages of growth. Some are immature, some are developing, and one or two may be fully developed. We know in case of human female, when baby takes the birth, normally we produce one baby at a time. Sometimes there are twins or some other cases. So, as a rule, one follicle will mature at a time. We know that in human female there is menstrual cycle that controls ovulation at the mid cycle time, and that is a time when Graafian follicle will ovulate. Let me start the story of development of follicle right from the very small follicle. You can see in the diagram. Now, under the influence of hormones, it will mature, it will grow, it is stimulated. The word stimulation here means growth, and finally it will grow to a mature follicle, which is also termed as Graafian follicle. Now, what is the difference between the two? The immature follicle is a ball of cells, but in the Graafian follicle one can see a cavity which is called antrum. You can see on the right side of the diagram a mature follicle, Graafian follicle with a horseshoe shaped cavity, antrum, and presence of antrum cavity in a follicle is direct indication of the fact that follicle is mature and is ready to ovulate. The Graafian follicle is not a ball of cell. It has structural details like there is ovum placed acentrically towards one side, surrounded by clear gelatinous layer, zona pellucida, and now this zona pellucida is surrounded by cellular layer called corona radiata. Towards the periphery one can see three layers: theca externa, theca interna, and granulosa layer. Then this arrangement leaves the space in the center, which I have already told you, antrum. It is filled with antral fluid. One more thing which I would like to make clear here is that because ovum is acentrically placed, that means towards one side. So, at one point it will be touching the three layers: theca externa, theca interna, and granulosa, and that point is called cumulus oophorus, and it provides a seat for this ova to sit. Another thing which I would like to bring to your notice, students, is that when ovulation takes place, ova does not come out alone. It comes along with zona pellucida and corona radiata, which in this case we can call ova complex. So, ovulation means ova complex is delivered out. This cavity, which is filled with fluid, the antrum, it also has role to play. In the diagram you can see, at the time of ovulation, Graafian follicle will come close to the outer boundary of ovary, and at this point the cavity, antrum, and the fluid, the antral fluid, starts coming out bit by bit, drop by drop, and along with this drop comes out the ova complex, and that is ovulation. Now, ova has come out from ovary and it will take its route to fimbriated ends of oviduct, then if fertilized, uterus. I still want to explain ovary in some more detail. After ovulation has taken place, this Graafian follicle is converted to another structure called corpus luteum. On the left side of diagram you can see big round yellowish color structure, that is corpus luteum. Luteum means yellow, and that is why it is yellow in color, and that is why it is called luteum. That means Graafian follicle minus ova is corpus luteum, but there are so many other differences also. Graafian follicle had structural configuration, it had some well defined structures, whereas corpus luteum is again a ball of cells. The only difference is that these cells are very big with very prominent nucleus and very clear boundary, which are the features for a secretory cell. And you know, a hormone progesterone comes out from corpus luteum. So, there are two female sex hormones, one is estrogen, one is progesterone. The estrogen, the source is Graafian follicle, and progesterone, the source of corpus luteum. That will also mean that estrogen is available in your body before ovulation and progesterone is available after ovulation. And that will also mean one more thing, that in menstrual cycle the estrogen will make follicular phase and progesterone will make secretory phase. These all are hormonal interplays and are very important for normal menstrual cycle to occur, and it is important for a girl to have a normal regular menstrual cycle to be called fertile. Unless one has normal cycle history, ovulation cannot take place, which we can understand from this description. Now, corpus luteum is a temporary endocrine gland. Why I call it temporary and why I call it endocrine? Endocrine gland because it is secreting a hormone, and temporary because it survives in the ovary only for 14 days in case of non-pregnant female and 90 days in case of pregnant female. Let me first talk about non-pregnant female. It will die in 14 days. Now, Graafian follicle ovulated ova on 14th day of menstrual cycle, that is mid cycle. Then corpus luteum survived for another 14 days, which makes 28 days, and once corpus luteum dies, there is no hormone to stabilize the condition, and hence bleeding will take place, and that is the menstrual bleeding, and that is the indication that cycle is taking place. This is detailed structure of Graafian follicle. You can see ova acentrically placed. You can see very clear zona pellucida surrounded by corona radiata. You can see cumulus oophorus, that is bed for ova to sit. You can see all the three layers, theca externa, theca interna and granulosa, and antrum is so well defined and with antral fluid. So, this is a Graafian follicle which is ready to ovulate. You can see ovulation here. It comes towards the periphery of the ovary and ova is thrown out. This is result of very delicate, very complex hormonal mechanism in the body. One hormone or the other hormone, it should be neither less nor more. There should be proper proportion, and if that proportion is disturbed, ovulation will not take place. And that is what the fertility pill does. Normally for family planning methods, sometimes doctor gives to the woman the pills to be taken throughout the month. And that pill is made up of varying amounts of estrogen and progesterone. And when lady takes those pills, the only thing it is doing, disturbing the balance. If you want to disturb the hormonal balance in your body so that fertilization does not take place, so only way is either decrease the amount of one of the hormones or increase the amount one of the hormones. So, we cannot decrease inside the body what is happening, we cannot decrease, but we can certainly increase, and that is what the pills are doing. They are increasing the hormone level of one or the other or both, hereby disturbing the balance, and that is why ovulation will not take place. And once ovulation takes place, the corpus luteum is formed. This slide shows mammary gland, which is important part of reproductive system in female. This is also called breast. It has glandular part, it has space where milk is secreted, milk is formed, not all the time, only towards the end of pregnancy and after the parturition or delivery. And through this, the milk which comes is used to feed the child, and it has many medicinal and healthy things this milk carries from mother to baby. Now, you can see the glandular structure. Glandular means secretion, and of course, it is very nicely tuned in the body that all the time milk will not come out. Only when lady is pregnant, then one hormone called prolactin, which is normally inhibited in the hypothalamus and it comes out through pituitary. The inhibitory center is in the hypothalamus, the secretory part is in the anterior pituitary. Only when pregnancy is there, that inhibition is removed and hence prolactin is secreted, and this prolactin helps in the production of milk in the breast, and it comes out through nipple, and coming out of milk through nipple is controlled by another hormone called oxytocin and also by suckling stimulus. So, you can see how well it is tuned with the hormones and with the stimulus. So, it is available only when baby is about to be born and when baby is born. So, you can appreciate the female system, which is so complex, very complicated, still it works so efficiently because hormonal interplay works well in the human body, as human body is a wonderful machine. So, with this we come to the end of female reproductive system. The gamete in case of female is ova, which is haploid, having X number of chromosomes, that means 23 chromosomes, 22 plus 1, 22 autosomes and 1 sex chromosome, which is always X in case of ova. My dear students, I am Dr. Aruna Mohan from Delhi University, and I am here to discuss with you in this session gametogenesis. We have already discussed in earlier sessions asexual reproduction, sexual reproduction, and sexual reproduction we started with human, the reproduction in human, and we have understood the male reproductive system and also the female reproductive system. And we understand the male gamete is sperm and female gamete is ova, and also we are aware of the fact that gamete has half the number of chromosomes, that is 23 only, 22 autosomes and 1 sex chromosome, and we call it haploid, whereas our normal cells in the body, somatic cells, are diploid, and germ cell also, when they start undergoing division, at that time originally they are also diploid in nature. In this session, I am going to discuss gametogenesis. In case of men, it is spermatogenesis, because eventually sperm will be formed. Before I go into detail, let me make you appreciate why it is happening, why this division is taking place. Of course, you will say, to form the sperm, to form the male gamete. Of course, yes. But why half the number of chromosomes? Why should be a reduction division? The answer is, this sperm is going to fertilize ovum at the time of fertilization, and after that zygote will be formed, and that will finally develop and grow into a baby. When sperm fertilizes ovum, it is meeting chromosomes of ova also. So, if sperm was carrying full number of chromosomes and ova was also carrying full number, the diploid number, that is 46, then chromosome number will be doubled in the zygote, and the baby will have double the number of chromosomes than what parents had, and the next generation it will be doubled again. How many times will you double? And not only that, it will have many other consequences. So, nature answered for this, and hence the reduction division will make the number of chromosome to half, so that half the number of sperms and half the number of ova, the chromosome number, when they meet, the result is a zygote which now has diploid number or full number of chromosomes, and that is why the reduction division becomes important. At this point, I would like to remind you that division are of two types. One is mitosis and one is meiosis. In mitosis, chromosome number remains the same, but in meiosis, chromosome number becomes half. That is one point to remember. The second point in this case is, in meiosis there are two continuous divisions. The first one is reduction division and second one is simple mitosis. I am giving you these details because I am going to apply these details while explaining spermatogenesis to you. So, if first division out of two in meiotic division, if first division is a reduction division, that means when one spermatogonia is dividing into two, I repeat, when one spermatogonia divides into two, each one will have half the number of chromosomes. Now, when this will divide into two, now it will have the same number of chromosome because second division is mitotic. You can see in this slide, it started with one spermatogonia. That spermatogonia has undergone meiotic division, the first one, and that is reduction division. So, you have two cells, both are having half the number of chromosomes. You can see the movement of chromosomes. There on the left side is a bigger chromosome, on the right a smaller sized, and from both one chromosome has gone to each cell. That means one set in one and other set in other. Also, children, you know that you have chromosomes in pairs. That is why I said 23 pairs. From every pair, one will go to one cell, other will go to other cell. That means each pair is represented by one individual chromosome in one cell, and that is why and that is how the chromosome number becomes half. Now, we are ready with haploid cell. Now, this haploid cell will go simple mitotic division. Each will give rise to 2, and hence you will have total 4. From 2 you will have 4 cells, but now simple mitosis will result into 23 chromosomes only. So, please remember, we started with 46, it became 23 after first meiotic division, and now second meiotic is simple mitosis. So, all the 4 are having 23 chromosomes, and now they will give rise to sperms, and hence sperm will have 23 chromosomes. If we try to name these cells, we started with spermatogonia, primary spermatocytes, secondary spermatocytes, spermatids, and then the sperms. During this process, spermatogonia needed energy, nutrition and support, and that was provided by Sertoli cells which are present in the seminiferous tubule. Try to visualize or imagine that this spermatogonia was present in the seminiferous tubule. You can see in this slide, it is cut portion of seminiferous tubule, and spermatogonia is present near the periphery, which is taking part in meiosis, dividing, producing primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, spermatid, and you can see some sperms in the center of the lumen. Here is the sperm. By now, you are familiar with the structure of sperm. It has head, neck, middle piece and the tail. The acrosomal part of sperm helps in penetration of ovum. Try to imagine that ova which is larger in size, sperm is smaller in size. The ova which is larger in size provides a bigger surface area for sperm to touch it and penetrate it. The moment one sperm through acrosome touches the ova and pricks it, that is the point the outer membrane of ovum becomes tough, hard, so second sperm cannot enter. As I told you, in one ejaculation during the intercourse, millions of sperms are transferred from male to the vagina of the female, which all start swimming towards the uterus and then towards the oviduct and then towards the fimbriated end of oviduct. Whichever sperm reaches first will fertilize. They cannot struggle with each other in reaching first, because the moment one prick is there by the sperm, the outer covering of ova hardens and second one will not be able to penetrate. One more point which you all should remember, my students, that after ovulation the ova comes to the upper end of oviduct, and at this point this is the place where fertilization takes place. Why? Why it takes place near ovary or in the upper part of oviduct? Why not in uterus? Why not in lower part? The answer is that lifespan of ova in the female body is 48 hours or 2 days. Once ova is released from ovary and falls into the oviduct, now its life is 2 days, and in 2 days it cannot travel more than the upper 1/3 of oviduct. If it is fertilized, then it is to be fertilized in this area, and if it is not fertilized, it won't be able to move further because it will die. So, ova without fertilization cannot move and reach uterus. So, fertilization cannot take place in uterus, though sperm is passing through uterus, entering the oviduct and reaching up to the upper end. So, for fertilization to occur, the site of fertilization has to be the upper 1/3 of oviduct. That is the reason. After fertilization, when zygote is formed, now it has full life. It will take 7 to 8 days to reach uterus. If it is fertilized, it won't die. It will reach uterus, and after it reaches uterus, wherever it touches the uterus, that becomes the implantation site and the placenta will start forming. Coming back to sperm again. Once sperm penetrates the ovum and it reaches inside, now its nucleus, which is containing 23 chromosomes, will join the nucleus of ovum, which is also containing 23 chromosomes, and now it becomes one nucleus containing 23 pairs of chromosomes, hence 46 in total. If this sperm was Y carrying, the result is XY, and if this sperm was X carrying, the result is XX. Once the fusion of nuclei has taken place and zygote is formed, now this zygote will not die. Like I told that ovum will die in 2 days. Now this zygote will survive well and will move down to uterus in 7 to 8 days. And during this movement also it is dividing, and by the time it reaches uterus it is 32 or 64 celled stage, and then the implantation takes place. This slide shows in detail how spermatogenesis occurs, and it is schematic representation. You can see the meiotic division. You can also see the division of one spermatogonia into two. The first meiotic division is reduction division, and hence the chromosome number became half, which is very significant for proper number of chromosomes to go to the next generation. Also, I would like to tell you, my students, that if there is one chromosome less or one chromosome more in the baby, it is going to create havoc in the life of the child. So, we cannot afford one chromosome more or one chromosome less. That results into syndromes, so many kinds of syndromes which we may discuss in some other session. So, once reduction division takes place properly, both the cells have half the number of chromosomes, neither more nor less. And if I say half, it does not mean any half, it means a particular half. And what is the meaning of particular half? That out of 23 pairs, each pair, from each pair means 2 chromosomes, from each pair one goes to one, other goes to other, from second pair one goes to one, other goes to other. That means you have 23 chromosomes if you number them 1 to 23 in one cell and 1 to 23 in other cell. And you are aware of the fact that chromosomes have genes and genes carry characters. So, try to appreciate that when zygote is formed, the one chromosome has come from mother, one set, and one set has come from father. If I explain in other way, your father had paired chromosomes, your mother had paired chromosomes, your father gave you one from one pair, second from second pair, hence 23 from 23 pairs in the form of sperm, and your mother gave 23 from 23 pairs in ova, and now when fertilization took place, you have 23 from father and 23 from mother, and that is how you have characters from both the parents. Coming back to this slide, after first meiotic division, the first division of meiosis, which is reduction division, these two cells are having half the number of chromosomes. Now, they will undergo simple mitosis to produce 4 cells, and these 4 cells will give rise to 4 sperms. And the point for you to understand that one spermatogonia will give rise to 4 sperms. Now, you have understood the process. Then in spermatogenesis, one cell gives rise to 4 cells, and 4 cells will give rise to 4 haploid gamete, male gamete sperm. That means, there are so many spermatogonia and millions of sperms are produced. In case of men, the moment boy enters into puberty, he starts producing sperms and he will produce till the last day of his life. Though the quality of sperm is slightly affected with the increasing age. So, we have understood the topic gametogenesis in relation to spermatogenesis, formation of male gamete sperm in male system by the process of meiosis from germ cell called spermatogonia, which is lodged in testis inside the seminiferous tubules, and it gets nutrition in the process from Sertoli cells, and hormonal part is looked after by Leydig cells. So, a complex phenomenon, but very simple and is done by our human body machine in a very efficient manner. Hello students, I am Dr. Aruna Mohan from Delhi University. I am here to discuss with you in today's session gametogenesis in female, that is oogenesis. So far we have already discussed what gametogenesis is and what is its significance, why it should take place and what is the result. In female, when gamete is formed, which we call ova, then it is oogenesis. To describe oogenesis in a proper way, it is required to show you this diagram of TS of ovary. You can see the follicles And now I will concentrate on Graafian follicle. You know that oogenesis is the formation of ova which should take place in the ovary. We also understand the fact that ova will be formed by oogenesis through meiosis or reduction division. But the story of reduction division or formation of gamete is not the way it happened in case of spermatogenesis. Of course, in both the cases gametes are formed, but here the method or the process is slightly different for some reason. In the ovary you can see the Graafian follicle, you can see ovulation taking place or ova coming out, and you can also see the corpus luteum, a functional corpus luteum. As I told you in the previous sessions that functional corpus luteum lies in ovary only for 14 days, and after that it dies, and then it is called corpus elatum. Corpus luteum, because it is yellowish, it is living, and corpus elata means it is white, fibrous and dead. Dying of corpus luteum is important to initiate the next menstrual cycle and formation of ova in the next cycle. Please remember, students, that in case of man, once he starts making the sperms, that is at puberty, the process is continuous every day, every minute, every moment till the last day of his life. But that is not the case with females, that is not the case in women. At puberty, she starts with menstrual cycle and she gives out only one ova in 1 month. So, 12 ovas and 12 months or 1 year. Now try to imagine the reproductive life of female is limited. It starts at 14 and is over by 42, 44 or 46, where she enters into menopause. Now at 40 years, how many ova she will be able to release? From 14 to 44, you can calculate. Not many, some 400. But when we are born as a baby girl, we have millions of follicles in our ovary, and each follicle is capable of producing one ova, and meiotic division will take place in ovary. So, what is happening to other follicles? We are using only 40 or 50, maximum 60. We have thousands of follicles. The answer is these follicles, they support the other follicle which is developing fast, because the follicle which is developing fast will finally result into the formation of Graafian follicle. So, follicles in the neighborhood of this developing follicle will support, give nutrition and help, and that is how the number of follicles goes on reducing. And of course, this is hormonally controlled also. I did tell you there are two hormones, female sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone, which is coming out right from the ovary from inside. And other than this, there are some hormones coming out from pituitary which also help in cycling mechanism. Also, please appreciate the fact that man has no cyclical activity as far as his reproductive system is concerned, but as far as female is concerned, human female, there is cyclical activity, and of course, it is due to cyclical interplay of hormones, and this cycle begins right in the hypothalamus. So, the female's hypothalamus is cyclical. It cycles and produces hormones in a particular way, and that will make our pituitary cyclical. That will result into cycle in the ovary, and that will result into cycle in the uterus. So, we can call it hypothalamic cycle, pituitary or hypophyseal cycle, then ovarian cycle, then uterine cycle. See how complicated the female system is, and all these cycles, if they go correctly, then only ovulation will take place in the uterine cycle, which we also call menstrual cycle, and it finally leads into bleeding for 4 days. If bleeding is okay for 4 days, that means this female is fertile. If the girl is not having cycle or irregular cycle, there is need to find out why it is happening so. Coming back to ova formation. The oogonia, like in case of testis you had spermatogonia, here you have oogonia, which will give rise to ovum, a female gamete. This oogonia, when it becomes functional, it is primary spermatocyte, it is primary oogonia, and now this primary oocyte or oogonia will undergo divisions, and that division we are going to discuss in detail now, and that will form part of gametogenesis or part of oogenesis in this case. This is the mature follicle which is having a ova, and this ova is definitely haploid, and this is formed after oogenesis. During oogenesis, the first female germ cell, primary oocyte, underwent meiotic division, and the first meiotic division is a reduction division, and it formed 2 cells. The point of difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis is that in spermatogenesis 1 cell gave rise to 4 cells and hence the 4 sperms. In case of oogenesis, of course, from 1 cell 4 cells will be produced, but only 1 ova, not 4 ova. Why and how? We are going to discuss that. In this particular slide, you can see part of oviduct and part of uterus. You can see fimbriated end, you can also see ovary. And when ovulation took place, ova came into the fimbriated end, the initial 1/3 of oviduct, and fertilization has to take place here if it is taking place. It is also numbered by days, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. As I told you, life of ova is 2 days. If it is not fertilized, it will die. Now try to see up to what point it has reached in 2 days? Hardly 1/3. And if it is not fertilized, it will die at this point. It will not reach uterus. But if it is fertilized, you can see 2-celled stage at end of 2nd day, and then 4-celled stage towards the 3rd day, and then it is dividing further, because one zygote is formed, division begins. 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, and by the time it reaches uterus, the blastula which is formed, initially it is called morula because it looks like morula, mulberry kind of thing, and then it becomes round, it is called blastula, and it is like a ball of cells, and in this stage 16 or 32 cell stage, it reaches uterus. You can see it is getting implanted in the endometrium of uterus, and once implanted, the placenta is formed and further divisions will take place, and baby will form out of this in due course of time. In this slide, I wish to show you a schematic representation of oogenesis. As I told you, the division will begin from oocyte. There are so many oocytes in the ovary. Some will become functional before the other, and these functional oocytes will be called primary oocytes, and this primary oocyte will undergo meiotic division. Please remember, students, that meiotic division takes place only in the sex organs, testis and the ovary, nowhere else in the body. So, now this primary spermatocyte will enter into meiotic division, and the meiotic division has 2 phases, the first and the second. The first one is reduction division. So, when this primary oocyte divides into 2, both are having half the number of chromosomes. But now the point to remember here is that one is bigger in size and other is smaller in size. In case of spermatogonia or in case of gametogenesis in man, both the cells were of equal size. Here it is not so. One is big, one is very small. The small one is called polar body and big one is a cell. Both are having half the number of chromosomes. Now, these two will undergo second division of meiosis, which is simple mitosis, and it will give rise to, the bigger one will divide into again unequally, one big and one small, you can see in the slide, and the small polar body if divides, sometimes it divides, sometimes it does not. In some species it divides. If it divides, it will give rise to 2 polar bodies. So, what is the result? 3 polar bodies and 1 ova. So, division is unequal to make ova big. So, surface area is there for sperm to reach it easily. Also, from this you appreciate one more fact, that out of one female germ cell or oogonia or primary oocyte, we have only 1 ova. We do not have 4 ova, like in case of man we had 4 sperms. And there lies a reason why we produce 1 ova at a time and hence usually 1 baby at a time. Producing more babies at a time, it is a primitive feature, and producing only 1 baby at a time is an advanced feature, and we have evolved in the course of evolution. But it does not mean if a lady is giving birth to twins, she is a primitive lady. No. You know that in course of evolution, we are carrying some of the characters with us to prove that evolution has taken place and we are evolved from lower animals, and hence sometimes we do exhibit some primitive features and we can rather call them more advanced now. So, sometimes there are twins, identical or non-identical. Identical, only 1 ova is produced, and when it is undergoing division, it divides into 2 and both will develop into 2 babies and they are identical twins. Sometimes in place of 1 ova, 2 are produced simultaneously and both are fertilized, and now these are non-identical twins. As